Welcome to this beginner yoga series. Now, this is not just for the beginner. This series is for somebody who maybe has practiced yoga before and stepped away from the practice and just kind of wants to reacclimate, or maybe it's somebody who's a seasoned yogi and just wants to come back for the basics. So, this series, we're going to cover tips and tricks, like things to know before you practice, different styles of yoga, because there's a lot to choose from. And then some of the basics that you'll hear in a yoga class, some of the language that yoga teachers use that maybe you're like, I don't know what that person's meaning. And then just a basic, gentle flow that anybody can do, whether you're in a chair or if you choose to be on the floor. But this video is going to talk about the tips and tricks that you need to start or establish or continue a yoga practice. So, the first thing is out of the gate, this is not a competitive practice. This is not an exercise. This is not something where you need to compete with other people. And I know that it's hard. It's really hard, which is why a home practice is so amazing because you're not surrounded by other people that maybe have been practicing a long time. And it doesn't matter how great you love yourself, we're human beings. And it's so easy to compare ourselves to somebody else. And so the first thing to remember is that this practice is for you, it's yours, and there is no competition, no comparison. And we must be willing to give ourselves grace. And when we can do that and we can come and arrive in our yoga practice, whether it's in a chair or on a yoga mat, without competition and comparison, we're going to be just fine. So just remember that. And a lot of times I choose in my YouTube channel, there's a lot of videos out there where I don't even practice with you as I guide you because I think there's a visual interference that happens. And if I'm on the mat practicing and you're watching me on a screen, you might have those thoughts that trickle in of like, I'll never be able to do that, or I'm not good enough. And those just don't belong in our everyday life. And they definitely don't belong in our yoga practice. So, first thing, it's not exercise, it's not a competition, and it's not a space for comparison. And then to give yourself a lot of grace. Anytime we start something new, it's hard. And when I used to teach in a gym, I would always say to the people who would start something in January to not let the people who have been in the gym for 10 years bully you. And it happens, and that's the truth. And it was really hard. Like the people who have had gym memberships for a long time would often complain about how crowded January was. And we have to remember that everybody is a beginner at something. Everybody starts day one at something. And 10 years ago, those people walked in the door for the first time and they were beginners. So we have to be tender with each other, tender with ourselves. So that's like the first rule. And then the second thing is to think about the breath. And I'll go into this more in detail about the lingo that yoga teachers often use when it comes to the breath. But the basic way that most of us breathe when we're living our life is very short and swift. Oftentimes, we're under a lot of pressure, whether we're driving, we're parenting, we're in pain, we're in emotional pain, we're stressed. We have very shallow breath. And so the breath is going to be the anchor that keeps you steady when the body speaks a language that might be uncomfortable. So we want to have an equal breath when we're practicing yoga and a fuller breath than when we normally breathe. Now, with this practice, because yoga is called a practice, it's not something that we do, it's something that we become. But when we show up to practice breathing, we're actually retraining our brain and our body on how to breathe. When a baby is first born, there's this huge breath. And then toddlers have their belly protruding and they're walking around owning their life, breathing the way that we're supposed to breathe. Then, as we start to age and we start to recognize there's stressors in our life, whether our parents are fighting or we're having to move, or maybe we don't read as well as the other first grader, we start to withhold the breath. As we age a little bit more, we start to feel unworthy. We start to feel not good enough. We start to have a lot of pressure, middle school, high school, all of it. We start to withhold the breath, and we even start to round the shoulders. And then we add in a device, a phone, and we're like this. And so the breath, the lungs start to compact. And what the yoga practice does is it retrains us to have full, voluptuous lungs. So you will breathe from the very bottom of the lungs all the way up until it gets really uncomfortable in the throat. And then you will breathe back down. Now, people with high levels of stress actually breathe reverse. When they breathe in, they actually pull their belly in, which is reverse. And when they breathe out, they go, and their belly sticks out. That's not the way we were born to breathe. We want to fill up the balloon, a big, giant breath, let it get big, 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 big. And then on the exhale, we allow the navel to come back to the spine and we empty everything. Now, the exhale is most important because most of us hang on to a little bit of breath, and that can go into many reasons, whether we're stressed, we're worried, we have lack and limitation and fear of scarcity. We want to hold on. And so, as I take you through this series, I'm going to encourage you to empty everything you got. And when you think you're empty, breathe out more. Then take a breath in. Okay, so the breath is going to be brought into the practice because it's a relationship between the body. And as we learn the movements and the postures with the practice, you'll see that there's a method and a rhythm, almost like a dance, that the breath is very, very involved in. And it's an intuitive, almost a marriage, if you will, between breath and body. So the things that you will need to start a yoga practice, you don't need fancy clothes. You don't need a fancy place. You don't need any tools other than I recommend yoga blocks. I like the foam blocks compared to the cork. The corks are a little bit thinner and they're very, very hard. Now we're going to lay on the blocks or put the blocks behind us if we're sitting in a chair. So we want them to be a little bit of give. So I like the foam blocks. I'll put my Amazon link below with my favorite yoga blocks. You can grab those. You can go to Walmart. You can get them anywhere you want. Pick a pretty color, something that you're going to like, but I recommend 2 yoga blocks. You'll also need a yoga strap or a belt. You can use an everyday belt or a mesh belt or a mesh strap. I don't recommend the stretchy things that you might get at physical therapy. Those aren't good because you might snap, they might pop, right? So we want a mesh or a cloth or a leather belt that we can use to expand the body. Okay, so we're going to have some lengthening. We're also going to use it for our lower body when we want to get a little deeper stretch. These tools are not for the beginner. A strap and blocks are for a seasoned yogi or a beginner. A lot of misconception and myth is that if you need a block, then you're not really doing good yoga. And there is no such thing as doing good yoga. That is language we got to get out of here. We don't do good at yoga. We are practicing something that's going to enhance our life. Okay, it's a lifestyle, it's a mindset, it's a way of being. Now, the last thing I'll tell you about what we need to remember about the yoga practice is the definition of yoga is union, which means 2 things yoking together. For you, it's going to be your mind and your body, your breath and your body, your mind and your spirit. When we practice together, you and I are in union. So, a lot of times in my daily work life, teaching adaptive yoga to people with neurological conditions, holding their hands and pulling them towards me and letting them pull me towards them, that's yoga. That's union. It's not fancy postures. It's not standing on your head. It's not touching your toes. It's not becoming a pretzel. It's not looking great in your fancy yoga clothes. It is union, you and you, building a relationship with yourself. So, when we think about yoga, it's a bicycle wheel, and there's 8 spokes on the wheel. Only one of them has to do with the body. Only one is called asana, which is posture. The other 7 spokes on the bicycle wheel have to do with how we show up in the world. And the breath. Breath is one spoke. So a little bit of body in the breath, but it's really how we manipulate the breath, how we ground with the breath, how we can use the breath when life gets hard. So the other spokes on the bicycle wheel of yoga are really things that we'll talk about, but it's really taking the practice out into your daily life. So just remember that one part of yoga is asana or posture, only one. So don't get hung up on doing it right or looking right, or is this the right posture? There is no right. It is your body. You are perfect as you are. The sensations that you feel in your body as we move through the practice are yours. And if it's yours, it's right. Okay. All right. Those are your tips and tricks for starting or establishing or maintaining a yoga practice. Where you will need to do this in your home is just a quiet, uninterrupted space. When I first began my yoga practice, I had 3 young children under the age of 12. I had no space. And so I put my sofa at a diagonal. So the space behind the sofa was this tiny little space. And that was my yoga space. And then in time, as kids moved out and grew up and aged and all that, I now have a dedicated space for my practice. But you don't need a fancy space. You need a yoga mat or a chair, 2 blocks, and a strap. That's it. If you like to have soft music on in the background, great. Tell your family, I need 30 minutes by myself, and make that something that's a commitment to you and your family. Because the thing is when we start a yoga practice, we will start to influence the people closest to us. It's like a ripple effect. We throw in a pebble into the lake of yoga, into our own self-care, our own wake up, our own dedication to self, and it begins to ripple out. And the people closest to you will see the benefit. And then they will become changed and their circle will become influenced. And you are making a difference in the world just by saying yes. So, next video is going to be the different styles of yoga and then finding one that matches your body, your intention, and your desires. So, stay tuned. I'll see you next video. Bye.